Okay, so today's Kuf Mem Tet. Today's daf is Kuf Mem Tet 149. We're starting just at the Mishnah at the bottom of Kuf Mem Chet Amud Bet. New Mishnah. Mone Adam et Orchav V'et Parperotav Mipiv. A person can count the guests that he has and the portions that he has. Let's say a person is organizing his menu. He's dividing up how much food he needs or has for the number of guests that are going to be attending the Shabbat meal. So he can do that mipiv, he can do that orally, but he shouldn't use a list. The concern is, as we're going to see in the Gemara, one of two possible concerns that we might have with him using the list. It says, Mefis adam im banav vim bnei veto ala shulchan. A person can make a lottery with his children and the members of his household on the table. What that means is, let's say he says, okay, we're going to draw straws to decide who gets, who gets served first. So that could be a big deal. If we did that at Magen David, it would be good. Instead of standing on line, for the dafina, you just have to take whoever gets the lottery. So they would roll dice, or they would just pick straws, or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, big piece.
Yeah. No, it says, but you can't do it big or small piece. That's what he says. Lo mana gdola keneged mana ketana. So only if it's equal amounts. But you're just arguing about, or you're just competing for who is going to receive their food first. But you can't do mana gidola keneged mana ketana, which means you can't say, okay, whoever picks the longest straw will get the biggest piece. We're going to see why this is a concern. The Gemara is going to explain. You can't do it based on size. Umatilin halashin ala kodashim biyom tov v'lo ala manot. And you can make lotteries, similar concept lotteries between the Kohanim for the korbanot on Yom Tov, but not on the portions. So the Gemara is going to explain what this means. It's very cryptic at first. Now we turn to Kuf Mem Tet, Amud Aleph, and we see the Gemara. Mai ta'ama, what is the reason why you cannot read a list of guests and portions from a written document? Why do you have to do it by memory? So Rav Bevai says, Gezerah shema yimchok, the concern is you might erase. Why would you erase? Because you see that you don't have enough food, you have a shortage, and if you leave the list like that, the guy who gets excluded is going to find out, he was on the original list, so you'd better erase it so he doesn't see it, because otherwise the waiter's going to call out, Mr. Smith, you're next. No, Mr. Smith is not supposed to be on the list. You're worried that you're going to have a shortage of food. So therefore you might erase the list. Abaye says, notice it doesn't say you might add to the list. That wouldn't be an emergency, but if you had too many guests, then you could see why you might have to erase. So Abaye says, Gezerah shema yikra b'shtarei hedyotot. That the concern is that you may come to read shitrei hedyotot. You may come to read documents that are of a business nature on Shabbat, and reading documents of a business nature on Shabbat is not permitted, as we already know. So you have two possibilities. Either that it's a concern if you start reading this kind of thing with numbers and allocations of food, you might start reading business documents. You might say, well, if I can read that, I can read my balance sheet from work. Or the concern is that if you read it, you may come to erase or adjust the list in some way.
They call business document divrei hedyotot.
Hedyotot just means regular. Shitrei hedyotot, because hedyot is just a regular person. So my benayhu, what's the difference? In other words, do these reasons have any practical import, or it's just these are reasons, they're just theoretical? So we assume they must have an implication to them. So ika benayo de katava kotel umidle. So there's a difference. Let's say you wrote very high up on the wall, like how they have it, like Penn Station in New York. They have the trains, up very high, so you can't reach that. So since you can't erase it, because because according to the one that says we're concerned about erasing, since you can't reach it, you're not going to be able to erase it. But the one that says the concern is that if you read this document with numbers and figures and names, you might come to read another document that's a business document that doesn't have anything to do with Shabbat. So then he might also prohibit you from reading it off the wall, reading the writing on the wall. There you go. Amar Shema Yimchok. But according to the one that says Shema Yimchok, we're concerned about erasing Necho Shema Yikra. Why doesn't he also have a concern? In other words, it's very nice to mention that there are two reasons, but when the reasons are not mutually exclusive, they're both valid, right? So why the guy who says Rav Bevai, who says the concern is erasing, why isn't he also concerned that you might read business documents? So ulishema, and it says Vitu ulishema yimchok lo chayshinan. And moreover, even according to his position that he says that the concern is about erasing, you should still be worried. Why? Because we learned in the Braita lo yikra lo oraner v'amar rabba afilu gavosh te komot afilu gavosh te mardaot afilu asara batim ze al gavze lo yikra. That we know that there's a gezerah that you can't read by the light of a candle on Shabbat, as we learned many parakim ago in the first parak. I mentioned it. So, and what was the halakha that Rabbah said? That even if it's 2 stories above you, even if the candle is 2 whip lengths above you, a whip was even larger than a story, even if it's 10 houses above you, still, you can't read to the light of a candle. They didn't make a distinction between where the reason for the gezerah was relevant and where it wasn't relevant. Even though obviously you can't reach a candle that's 10 houses above you, still you're reading to the light of a candle. Shema yater, because you might tilt it. So even though you can't reach it, the gezerah is the gezerah, right?
Yeah, but it's the concept.
Right, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. In other words, once they make a gezerah, even if it doesn't apply in your particular case, you still can't do it. So here too, just because the writing is high up on the wall doesn't mean we should make an exception, because maybe if you do that, you'll do it when it's low on the wall. What's the difference? So the gezerot are blanket gezerot. So that means that if they made a prohibition of reading off of the wall, it shouldn't matter if it's high or low. Ella ika benaihu, rather we reject this. It doesn't have to do with where it was written on the wall. The katava kotel umitate, that really it's on the wall and it's low. Because guda bishtara lo michalaf. Because basically what we say is this, that it doesn't have to do with the height of the writing on the wall. The writing on the wall is writing. So according to the one that's concerned about erasing, it doesn't matter whether it's high on the wall or low on the wall, we're still going to apply the gezerah. But according to the one that says that the concern is, if you read this material, you're going to read other business material, nobody's going to confuse guda, a wall, bishtara, with a document. Guda bishtara lo michalaf. A person's not going to mistake a document. They're not going to say, oh, if I can read off the wall, I can read a document. They're 2 different things. But let's switch it again and say, wait, but according to Abaye, who says that the concern is that if you read off the wall, right? If you read one thing, you might end up reading business documents, and so therefore he says in this case, because it's written on the wall, you're not going to come to read documents because a wall is not a document. But still, why isn't he concerned that maybe you'll erase it? Why is that not also a concern for him? Ela ika benaihu, rather the distinction is the chayik atavla ve'apinkas. These are sorts of boards that they would use. In other words, different kinds of things that you would almost like we would have today.
Blackboard.
Yeah, like a blackboard type of thing, like a mini blackboard, like the old version of an iPad. If you can remember what things were like, you would have a kind of tablet that you would write on, or a kind of luchot that they would have that were hard that they would write on or etch into. Okay, so according to the one that says that the whole concern here about reading lists is that you might erase. Well, if you're using one of these tablets, it's very difficult to erase from them. So we're not really concerned. However, Leman de Amar, according to the one that says Shema Yikra Chayshinan, we're still concerned. According to the one that says if you read from these tablets, you might come to read from other documents that are business documents, because after all, they use these ledgers for business purposes as well. Okay? But still we have the problem. Why is there an exclusivity here? Why is it that the one that says that in other words, the one that says that the problem is erasing, even if I deal with that problem and I use something that it's difficult to erase, he still should be concerned, maybe I'm going to read business documents. In other words, why is each one not concerned for the reason of the other one? They should both be concerned with both reasons. And maybe you're going to tell me that the reason is because he says, Rav Bevai is going to say, that you can't erase off of one of these tablets very easily. And not only that, but they're not easily confused with documents because it's a solid tablet, it's not paper. So he says, but we learned in a Braita moneh adam kama mibifnim v'kama mibachutz v'kama manot atid lahaniach lefnehem miketav shal gabei hakotel aval lo miketav shal gabei tavla u'pinkas. But we said in a Braita that a person can count how many people he has inside the house and how many outside. Because remember, the really chashuv people, remember we learned from Achashverosh, the more important VIPs are inside. The less important are outside. That's what we learned from Achashverosh. So you could look at who's inside, who's outside, who gets which types of portions, for who gets the food for the lower class, who gets the upper class food. You can count all that from writing on the wall, but not from writing on a tablet. So what does that mean? That you see that the wall and a tablet are different, that even though you might not confuse a wall with a tablet, you might not confuse a wall with a document, you might well confuse a tablet with a document, because they're both portable things that you would use regularly in business. So what are we talking about here? So obviously we're not talking here about a case where you wrote with ink on the wall or with ink on your ledger, because in both cases we should be concerned about erasing. We must be talking about where it was engraved, and so we're not concerned about erasing. And yet, what do we say? You see that nonetheless we're concerned. So even in a case where you engraved it, in other words, you engraved it on the wall or you engraved it on a ledger, we're still concerned that a person might come to, although they won't confuse the wall with a document, they might confuse the ledger with a document. So in this case, what we're saying is, when it's engraved on the wall, obviously there's no concern about erasing, because erasing you can't do off of the wall. When it's engraved, you can't erase. And we're not concerned that you're going to confuse reading off the wall with reading documents. Okay, but what about the tavla or pinkas? What about the ledger or the tablet? So there we say that if it's engraved, okay, we're not concerned about erasing, but we still have to be concerned that you might say, well, if I can read off of a ledger for this purpose, maybe I can read my business balance sheets, for another purpose. All right, so what are we going to do then? So none of these cases, so we see then that the tablet is considered the same as a document, so we can't say that, we can't use that as our dechayika tavla pinkas. The case of engraving on a tablet or a ledger, like we said before, cannot be the case that distinguishes between them. Because according to the one that says erasure is the problem, fine, he won't have a problem. But according to the one that says reading is a problem, he's going to have a difficulty. But the issue is that everybody should be concerned that one might come to confuse a tablet or a ledger with a document. So that should be an issue for everybody. So therefore, what are we going to do then? So we say this. Right, really we have to go back to the wall issue, to the wall case. Why? Because anything on a ledger or anything on a tablet is going to be mistaken for documents, and if it's mistaken for documents, everyone's going to agree we're concerned you're going to read from regular documents. So forget about ledger, forget about tablet, we're looking at the wall. Umidli, and it's very high. Like we originally said, the original case that we tried to say was the machloket here, is the case we're going to go back to, that the writing is on the wall and it's very high. And what you said about Rabat ehi. So you told me that no, that can't be the case. Why can't that be the case? Because if it's written very high on the wall, even though it's written very high on the wall, it should be the same as a candle that's very high. When a candle is very high and I read by the light of a candle, do I say that it's allowed because it's very high? No. Rabbah said we don't say that. So why should I say that writing on the wall that's very high, I'm not concerned about erasing it?
That's a quick question. When they say it's like something, actually, this is a little bit ahead, but when they say it's a dispute between Tana'im, is it a dispute between Tana'im that was not resolved, and that's why
it wasn't resolved? Back? Right, it wasn't resolved.
So any time that they bring something back,
yeah, but you're preempting us. But yeah,
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what it means.
Right.
That it was both views were still in play at that time, right? So Tana'im, it's really machloket Tana'im. The Tana'im moneh adam et orchav v'et parperotav mipiv v'lo min haketav Rabbi Achamatir. Okay, so this is explicit in a Braita that according to the Chachamim, you're not allowed to read off of anything, apparently not even off of the wall. And according to Rabbi Acha, you're allowed to read off the wall. You're allowed to read the writing on the wall. Daniel, the writing on the wall. Now, what's the point here? So again, we're trying to find a case where one opinion would permit and the other would prohibit. So we've said already that the one that's concerned, the side that was concerned with reading documents, he'll permit if it's on the wall, because he'll say that, well, the wall, you're not really going to confuse that with a document. So that reason would be satisfied by it being written on the wall. But what about the erasing problem? So we said, well, that could be satisfied when the writing is very high. Okay, then everybody might agree, or then let's say Abaye would agree that my view about reading documents is the concern, but the concern about erasing wouldn't be the concern. Or the other way around. Rav Bevai would say that your concern about reading documents isn't a concern because it's on the wall. But my concern about erasing could be a concern. Right? In other words, the question is, when can you factor one of them out? So it being on the wall means we're not concerned about it being confused with a document. We're only concerned about when would the issue of erasing come into play. So, and it seems to be a machloket tanaim, like we said before. So now the Gemara says, "Hey, what case are we talking about? Now, if it's written at a low point on the wall, we have to be concerned about erasing. We're talking about a case where it was written up on the wall. Therefore, the machloket between Rabbi Acha and the Chachamim is, if the writing is very high on the wall, are we still concerned that you might erase it? According to Rabbi Acha, we're not concerned because it's outside of your reach. He says that even gezerot midrabanan, when the reasoning doesn't apply, like in this case, when a concern about erasing doesn't apply, we don't apply the gezerah. So apparently if the candle was very high, according to him, you'd be allowed to read to it because you can't reach it. According to the Chachamim, once the rabbis make a gezerah, they don't look at the specific circumstances anymore. So even though the candle is 10 stories high, it doesn't matter.
That issue is unresolved?
That's the issue that was a machloket tanaim.
And that's unresolved?
Yeah, apparently so. I mean, now we've resolved it in favor of the majority opinion, but at this time, these two opinions were still in play, and so therefore, it was legitimate to say, well, according to the one who says that we don't apply gezerot in when the reason doesn't apply, so having the writing very high on the wall wouldn't be a problem. According to the one that says that it would be a problem, according to the one that says that we apply gezerot universally, whether or not the circumstances justify it, so then the writing up on the wall would be would be a problem still. So in other words, according to go back to
could annul a gezerah
potentially. That's a whole complicated thing, but possibly. Right, the circumstances are complex, but the circumstances are complex. But going back to this machloket here. So according to Rav Bivai, no, you can't. But according to Rav Bivai, who mentioned this issue of Shema Yimchok, right, that the only concern is maybe you're going to erase. He's talking about a case where, in other words, because he holds that even if the writing is very high, you're still not allowed to read off the wall because we're concerned. Because once there's a gezerah that you can't read off the wall, you can't read off the wall. And according to Abaye, he says no. If it's very high up on the wall, it's not going to be a concern because because we say that the gezerah only applies in circumstances where the reasoning is relevant. Okay.
So high no one can read it.
It could be so high that
I'm confused on this issue. I've always been.
Well, it's a complex issue. Now, it's like the same thing as we learned before about marit ayin. Once the rabbis made a gezerah on something because of marit ayin, now even if nobody could see you, you still can't do it.
Right.
It's the same concept.
But that
right?
I understand.
Yeah.
That I understand. But there's
so here too, they said you can't read by the light of a candle, so you don't.
Overturned. That it's like. It's
Gezerot could be overturned in theory, but you need a Sanhedrin to do it. So in any case, so this is the the conclusion is that basically this was the case where they had the dispute. In other words, the dispute was the reason why Rav Abaye brings in this additional concern about Shema Yikra b'Shitrei Hedyotot. So we have two different reasons prohibiting reading off of the wall. Reading lists. One doesn't apply to the wall, and one maybe or maybe doesn't apply to the wall, depending on the height that it's written on the wall. So basically, we see that there are different opinions about this issue. And you similarly have another machloket tanaim that parallels this to Tanya Shabbat, that you can't look in a mirror on Shabbat, according to the Chachamim. Rabbi Meir matir b'mar'eh kavua b'kotel. Rabbi Meir allows you to look at a mirror if it's attached to the wall. So the question is, ma'ishna kavua b'kotel. What's the reason why, if it's attached to the wall, you're allowed to use it? Because because before you go, in other words, the concern is if you look at yourself in the mirror and you see that you have a hair sticking out or something like that, you're going to pluck out the hair because you're going to notice you don't look good. You're going to fix something on your face. So he says, by the time you go to get scissors to cut your hair, you'll remember it's Shabbat. Because it's fixing, if you have in other words, if you have a mirror that you can carry, the concern is that anywhere you are, you could notice that you have some hair that you need to shave and you might do it. But if it's attached to the wall, You need to walk. So it says. So if that's the case, though, but even she'eno kavua nam yadachi v'chi medkar. But according to that, even if you had a portable mirror, by the time you go and actually get scissors to cut your hair, you're going to remember that it's Shabbat. Rather, what we're talking about is a mirror that they used to have made of metal that you would actually doubled as a razor. Okay, it doubled as scissors, so it had a sharp edge. So the Uchid Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Ravua, and it's like Rav Nachman said, the Rabba Bar Ravua said, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Ravua, Mipnei Ma Amru Mar Eshel Matechet Asura, because the Rav Nachman said that Rabba Bar Ravua said, why didn't they allow you to use a metal mirror on Shabbat? Mipnei Shadam Asui La'ashir Bam Nimin, because people would cut their hair with the mirror itself. Amadul Dalin, if they had some straggly hairs, they would. So, and if you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you're going to do this with the mirror to clean it off. You're not going to realize. So then, what's the machloket in the Baraita? The Chachamim say you can't use a metal mirror ever, even if it's attached to the wall. Why? Because once the rabbis made a gezerah that you can't use a metallic mirror, even if it's attached to the wall, where obviously you can't use it to cut your hair because it's attached to the wall, they still didn't allow you. Whereas,
as opposed to what? As opposed to
a hand mirror that's metal, a portable one. Rabbi Meir says is matir. He allows you if it's attached to the wall, because he says that one that's attached to the wall you can't use it to cut your hair with because it's attached to the wall.
You said metal.
Metal. The frame is metal.
Oh, so metal means it's attached to the wall?
No, it's two different things.
Oh.
In other words, what it's saying is that you're not allowed to use a metal mirror. There was a gezerah because you might use it to cut your hair.
Right, so it's metal as opposed
but
to
if it's
glass.
if it's attached to obviously the reflective part is glass, but it has a metal frame.
Right.
So if it's a portable mirror, they're concerned you're going to cut your hair.
Right.
If it's attached to the wall, there's not really any concern. But there's a machloket. If it's attached to the wall, did they still apply the gezerah or not? So according to the Chachamim, once they make a gezerah against metallic mirrors, it doesn't matter if it's attached to the wall. You can't get out of it. According to Rebbe Meir, we make exceptions. If in that particular case the concern doesn't apply because it's attached to the wall, then we should give you a license to do it. So in essence, this is the same machloket as we saw before, that if something's written high up on the wall, we're not concerned that a person can really erase it. So does that mean the gezerah doesn't apply? Rabbi Acha says that means the gezerah doesn't apply because it's written high up on the wall, you can't reach it. According to the Chachamim, the gezerah still does apply. Because once they made a gezerah that you can't read off of the wall, because Shema Yimchok, you might erase it, so even if it's very high, we're going to implement the gezerah anyway. Okay? So we see a precedent for this kind of thinking all over, and that's why sometimes we need. So according to the ones that say that Shema Yimchok wouldn't also, according to the side that says that Shema Yimchok in this case, he's saying Shema Yimchok even though it's very high up on the wall. That's the case where they're disagreeing. Really, in the end, in the Maskana, it seems like Abaye disagrees in both cases because he's saying once it's on the wall, it's not a concern at all. Because a wall is not going to be confused with a document, and his only concern is that you might confuse it with a document. But if it's low on the wall, right, there everybody is going to agree that you're also concerned about erasing. What the Gemara seems to be saying is that according to Rav Bevai, even if it's high on the wall, we're still concerned about you erasing. That's why he mentioned Shema Yimchok. Because if it's low on the wall, everybody agrees that we're concerned about erasing it, even off of the wall.
Right.
We're not concerned about confusing it with documents, but we're concerned about erasing it. If it's very high on the wall, that's where Rav Bevai is coming along and saying, we're still concerned about erasing it. What do you mean? You can't even reach it. How are you going to erase it? Without going and getting a ladder first. You're going to remember by then that it's Shabbat. Nope. Once they make a gezerah, it's a gezerah. That's it.
That's a question. There are gezerot that are made with an expiration date, right?
Right. Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
But those are later gezerot, not the Talmudic ones.
The gezerah of Rabbeinu Yonah.
The famous one is Rabbeinu Gershom, and that one, once it became a minhag, so then they weren't able to break it anymore.
He actually put an expiration date.
But he did put an expiration. He said 100 years, and
Right,
after 100 years, you could
it was more.
and there wouldn't be any problem.
Right, but they became the minhag, and now they became the minhag, and they weren't able to do it. There's all kinds of problems with gezerot, and that's a different gezerah. And you have to also, but you have to realize these gezerot in the Talmud were made by Sanhedrin. These are not gezerot that were made by one rabbi. So a gezerah made by a rabbi, it's already very tenuous. How can you make a gezerah at all? Who is he to make a gezerah? He can only make it for his community. For his community he can make it. But these are gezerah that were made by a batei din of a different stature. It's a totally different category. So it's much more difficult to change. Okay, so now we say as follows. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. כתב המלך תחת הצורה ותחת הדיוקנאות אסור לקרותו בשבת. This is fascinating because this is basically talking about a museum. Okay, it says that if you see captions written under a tzura, under some kind of a statue or under some kind of a display or a piece of artwork, or you see a caption written under a form. So if you look at what Rashi says, he says, "Kigon bnei adam hamitzayrim bakotel chayot mishunot o diuknot shel bnei adam," like people who make art on the wall of different kinds of strange animals or the images of people. Shel Maasim, or of events, Kagon Milchemet David v'Goliath, like David and Goliath. This is like Renaissance art. Which Rashi lived before that time.
But still, they would obviously.
Yeah, but they had that kind of art. So v'kotvin tachtea zot tzurat chaya plonit. They would write a caption under it. This is such and such animal. Like if you go into the Museum of Natural History or something like that. Okay, v'zod dioknit ploni plonit, and this is the image of David and Goliath or whoever. So they would have captions under, so it says you can't read them on Shabbat.
Rosa Parks.
Okay? V'diukna atzma af b'chol asur. And to look and gaze at an image, even on the weekday, you're not allowed to do. Why? Because it says don't turn after Elilim, don't turn after the other gods. My Talmudah, what does it mean? How are they interpreting Al Tifnu El Elilim? Amar Rabbi Hanin said Al Tifnu El Madatchem. Don't turn to, Rashi says, what does it mean Madatchem? El Asher Atem Oseim Midat Levavchem V'Chalal Shelachem. Don't turn after what you're making from your heart and your insides. Elilim Lashon Chalalim. Elilim here means what's within you. In other words, don't. So according to Rashi, there seems to be, and according to the Meiri, he seems to follow a similar interpretation here, that Rashi is basically saying, don't go to art museums. It's a waste of time. Why are you gazing at the images created by human beings of their own fantasies and imagination when you could be focusing on Divrei Torah? You could be focusing on, the Meiri says, you could be focusing on Hashem's handiwork. You want to look at something, look at the trees and the beautiful creation. Why are you looking at the Da Vinci paintings or whatever kinds of artwork? That's what Rashi says. Now Tosafot says actually this only applies to things that were done l'shem avodah zarah. He limits it, and the Shulchan Aruch actually brings the same. The Shulchan Aruch codifies that the only time you're not allowed to go is, let's say, to look at Christian artwork or some other religion, religious artwork. In the Renaissance for sure, Renaissance art, a lot of it. Now Renaissance art definitely, but the Tosafot and the Shulchan Aruch might allow you to look at like David and Goliath. They might not allow you to look at the other Renaissance art about other gods. Okay, so in any case, this is not just a Shabbat issue. It's a Shabbat issue insofar as if we read that, you might read other secular things, or even as Rashi says, Shema Yikra b'Shitrei Hadyotot. We're not worried that you're going to erase the caption that somebody wrote. We're worried that you're going to read other things that you shouldn't. However, the further concern is that you can't do histaklut. You can't look at artwork of idolatry, according to Tosafot, and any artwork according to Rashi. Rashi would not have been much of a Renaissance man had he wouldn't have been going to the museums. But it's really interesting that they had museum type things back then. So it says a person can make a lottery with his kids to decide who's going to get served first, but he can't divide he can't say whoever wins the lottery will get the larger piece or the smaller piece, because that's like a competition for the size of the piece that you're not allowed to do. So the Gemara says, you can make a lottery with your family but not with others. So my tama, what's the reason? Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel b'nei Chabura makpitin zel ze ovrin mishum midah mishum mishkala mishum minyan mishum novinu por'in b'yom tov. It's because of what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, that if you have a group of people who eat together and they're makpidin ze al ze, they're very particular about one another. In other words, if you're sharing a meal, everyone's been to a meal with a person like this, right? I want to see the bill. Oh, this soda, there was 50 cents. Oh no, that was your soda there. And out of the tax on this bill, exactly 6.7% of it is yours, and the rest, this mine. People like that. So people are extremely makpidin makpid on every little thing. Oh, I ate only 3 of the French fries. You ate 10. So we really have to divide the French fries. They were $2. So how much did I pay? So that's makpidin zelzeh. So he says people who are like that they're sharing a Yom Tov meal. So it says they're going to violate midah, measuring, mishkal, weighing, minyan, counting, lovinu porin, lending and borrowing, lending and paying back, or borrowing and paying back on Yom Tov. All of these things are prohibited because of Shema Yichtov. Maybe you're going to write on Shabbat or Yom Tov, but the point is that they're going to end up being involved. Now Tosafot has 2 interpretations here. The first interpretation is that what it means is that by definition, in other words, if you're that makpid, then you're really in your mind weighing everything. You're really measuring everything. You're counting every nut that the guy takes, every French fry. You're counting. So you're going to be right. You cheat by yourself. So he says that's version number 1. But then he says that can't really be true. He rejects that interpretation, and he says it's not that by definition people who are makpidim are automatically going to engage in measuring and lending and lovinu por in means you're going to be thinking of exactly what's the monetary value of the amount that he ate versus what I ate. Oh, he owes me this amount. You're going to be thinking those ways. He says that's not the answer. It means Shema Yavo. Maybe because you're so makpid, you're going to weigh, you're going to count, you're going to... So it's not that these people can't eat with each other intrinsically because automatically they're considered to be measuring and counting. It's that they might come to measure and count. And according to... it should say Hillel, not Beit Hillel. As we learned yesterday, according to Hillel, Af Mishum Ribit, they could come to violate Ribit as well, because we learned yesterday that if that guy ate an extra challah roll at your house, and then the next week you're like, hey, you ate an extra challah roll, you have to pay me back a challah roll. So then, and now the value of challah roll has skyrocketed because there's a wheat shortage, So I actually get more money back. That's ribit. So the point is, if they're very makpid on each other, that they're going to end up violating all kinds of prohibitions. And therefore, if we have a lottery, at the house with people who are makpidim, and one guy, he gets the large one, and one guy gets a small, or one guy, you're going to end up having these kinds of distinctions. They don't forgive one another. So they're like, oh, well, he got the large one, which means, he owes me this because, I got the small piece. We took a lottery. There were 2 pieces of chicken, one big, one is small. That guy got the large piece, I got the small piece, but that means, I need a bigger piece of kugel. Or whatever. I need it because, it's not fair. They're going to start calculating everything. So he says, if that's true, so if that's true, then why are we not concerned also about our children? Because if we're concerned about ribit, okay, we made a lottery, and the children end up one takes one piece, one takes another piece, and then now next week, they're going to say, well, I want to, you owe me this because you got last week, you got that. There's going to be a repeat going on. The answer is Kid Rav Yehuda Amarav, because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Yehuda Amarav, without the halvot banav bnei beito beribit, kidei lahat iman tam ribit. He says that you're allowed to lend to your children on ribit. Why? Because all their money is your money anyway. So let's say you give them an allowance every week or something like that. So and then you charge them, they want to borrow money, you charge them ribit, but really you're just paying yourself back with your own money. It's all your money anyway. Why did you want to do that? Because they wanted to teach them how painful it is to have to pay interest. So you charge them interest so they can feel the pain of paying interest. Actually, the halakha brought in Shulchan Aruch is that you can't do that. But the Gemara is saying that in theory one could do that. So that would mean that even though you assign a lottery and then next week that even if you did equal pieces, but then next week you have to be concerned that there's going to be some kind of reversal that I owe you this, you owe me that. You don't have to be concerned with the members of the family. So then why can't you do the same with large and small pieces? Why is it that you can only do a lottery for same size pieces? It should be that I could do a lottery for large and small pieces, and the next week we have to reverse or whatever, and it shouldn't be a problem. He says, it's true. You're correct. That that really there's something missing from the Mishnah. This is what it should say. That a man can make a lottery with his children at the table. Even if he makes a lottery, that one person will get the large piece and one person's going to get the small piece, it's okay. Because of what Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav. But he can't do that with other people. And that's because of what Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel. In other words, we cannot not have a situation where people are makpidin ze al ze. They're going to end up coming to, they're going to end up coming to measure and to weigh and this and that. Because if I do a lottery and I say, okay, you get the large piece of chicken, you get the small piece, and the guy got small pieces, saying, oh well, what about my amount of kugel, and what about my amount of this, and what about that guy's this? They're going to start measuring and being very technical. So that's the problem with assigning different sizes to different people who are not members of your family. Okay, members of your family, it's okay. But people who are not members of your family, it's not okay. And in reality, af b'chol achirim asur. And even on the weekday to do a lottery is prohibited, because it ends up being a type of gambling. Because what happens? We all had a meal that we're sharing together, and now you have a lottery where they're drawing straws, and one guy gets the smaller piece, one guy gets the big piece, and he's thinking to himself, "Hey, if I wouldn't have participated in this meal if I knew I was going to get the small piece of chicken." And now I'm giving that guy the big piece of chicken. So really, it's a type of gezelah, because when you lose, in other words, when you put your money into the pot to do this communal meal, you were thinking, I'm going to get a large piece of chicken. And now the other guy takes a large piece of chicken, you don't really want to give it to him. So it's like a type of gezelah, it's a type of stealing from one another. And that's why you can't do these lotteries with meals. You have to divide things up, evenly without any kind of lottery, because the lottery is a type of gambling, and it ends up assigning people things and forcing people to give up things that they're not really comfortable giving up. So we're skirting on gezelah, on a type of stealing. So matilin chalashin, we had it here, and we're going to get into some agadah for most of the rest of the Amud, but it said that the Kohanim can do a lottery to split up portions, to split up kodashim, korbanot, but not the portions. So mai avalo alamanot, what does it mean, not the portions? Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Berei de bat Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov, who was the son of the daughter of Yaakov, aval lo alamanot shel chol b'yom tov. What it means is if they brought a korban before Yom Tov, they can't split up the remaining meat on Yom Tov. Pshita, that should be obvious. What would you think? Since it says ve'amcha kimrive kohen, that since it says your people are like the fighting ones among the Kohanim, because the Kohanim had a reputation for fighting a lot amongst themselves over the portions of the korbanot. Afilu manot echol nami. You might think that even the portions of the weekday they'd be able to divvy up by a lottery, because you don't want them to fight over it and to argue over it. A lottery is better. Kamash malan, it comes to tell you that on Shabbat or on Yom Tov you can only divide up by lottery whatever was actually offered on Shabbat and Yom Tov. But what was offered on the weekday, you can't divide up on Shabbat or Yom Tov via a lottery, even though that might seem to be a good way to do it, because that will avoid the problem of contentious fighting. Still, you're not allowed to. And now we get into a little piece of agadah here. Am Rabbi Yaakov Berei bat Yaakov, since we're on the topic of things that Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the daughter of Yaakov, said, anybody whose friend is punished because of him, he doesn't enter into the inner chambers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem. Minalan, where do we get this idea from? If you're going to tell me, because it says, Vayomer Hashem yifateh et achav v'yal v'yipol beramot Gilad Vayomer ze bechov v'ze amar bechol. And so what this is talking about is in the story of Achav. Achav is going to go out. The Navi is summoned to Achav, and Achav asks if he should go out to fight in Ramot Gilad, and he tells him a story. He says, actually, in Hashem's court, so to speak, they were discussing how can we entice Achav to go fight in Ramot Gilad so he'll die, because he's a bad guy and he has to die. And one is saying, oh, I'm going to do it, and one says, I'm going to do it. And finally, a spirit comes and stands before Hashem and says, and he says, I'm going to trick him into going. And Hashem says, how are you going to do it? And he says, Vayomer etse, and he says, I'll go out. Vayiti ruach sheker b'fi kol neviav. And he says, I'm going to be a spirit of falsehood in the mouth of all of his prophets. Vayomer tifateh v'gam tuchal. And he tells him, go out and do it. So what ends up happening is, basically, if you remember the story, and he says to him at the end, he says, tifateh v'gam tuchal, say v'asechen, go out and do it. So what's the point? That Achav was going to be punished by dying in this war. And what ends up happening is he's going to go to war with Yehoshaphat, which Achav and Yehoshaphat, they were friends, and he goes to all of the Nevi'im, he goes to the different prophets, and he asks all of the false prophets, what should we do? And they all say, oh yeah, go, yeah, it's good, go. And then, of course, the one prophet of Hashem comes and says, Hashem, this is a trick. A falsehood is going into the mouths of all the Nevi'im to trick you to go into this war, and of course he gets killed in the war. But the point is that who is this Ruach Sheker? Who is this spirit of falsehood who wants to punish Achav? Because our discussion was that anybody who wants to bring about punishment, or anybody responsible for bringing punishment to another person, is not beloved by Hashem. And who is this spirit who wants to bring punishment upon him? It is none other than Navot, right? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zerucho Shel Navot. This is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says this is Navot. Navot Yisraeli was the person who had the kerem. He had the vineyard that Achav saw. He really wanted it. He's whining to his wife Izebel. Izebel says, "No problem. I'm going to take care of it." So she sets up. She frames him for a crime he didn't commit. She has Navot executed, and of course, the property of executed people goes to the king. So now Achav gets to have the vineyard that he wanted so much. Okay, so Navot is the one who wants to avenge his own death. And he says, I'm going to make sure Achav dies for what happened. Or might say, and what does it mean, get out? Because Hashem says to the spirit that wants to mislead Achav and lead to his destruction, get out and go do it. Amarav tzei memachitzati. Rav said, what did it mean? It meant get out from my inner chamber, because you want to go and cause harm to Achav. So what does that imply? That implies that since this spirit wants to cause the downfall of Achav, and wants to cause him to be punished, therefore it's a bad spirit that Hashem rejects and kicks out of his inner circle. Maybe that's not the reason. Maybe it's not because he was going to cause the punishment of Achav. It's because he said, I'm going to be a Ruach Sheker. I'm going to be a spirit of falsehood, and God hates falsehood. So even though in this case falsehood was necessary to trick Achav and cause him to fall, still, Hashem doesn't want falsehood. But it's not because of the punishment per se. Rather, it's from here. It says, you have been sated with more disgrace than honor. Drink also you and the uncircumcised. So what does this mean? Savata kalon mikavod. You've been sated more with disgrace than honor. Zeh Nebuchadnezzar. This is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Shetega matave arel. Drink you and also the uncircumcised. Zeh Tzidkiyahu. This is Tzidkiyahu Amelech, the good king Tzidkiyahu. Okay, so what is this talking about here? Now Rashi explains, and we're going to see more about this. This ben Nebuchadnezzar mishta'eh. This is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Shayam matil mishkav zachur ala melachim. He would sodomize all of the kings that he captured, that he overpowered. And when the day of Tzidkiyahu came, nimshecha orlato gimel meot amma. Suddenly, the foreskin of Nebuchadnezzar expanded to be 300 amot, and this prevented him from being able to sodomize Tzidkiyahu. So this is a story we're going to see a little bit later in the Gemara, but the point is that Tzidkiyahu was punished. The Arel is called the uncircumcised. No, because Tzidkiyahu caused the punishment to come to Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. So there actually is a medical condition that causes this.
Really?
Elephantiasis, which is a filarial worm, can actually cause that.
Here they're interpreting it that it refers to Tzidkiyahu, that he was being called Arel because he caused a punishment to come to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, but really in the story, Nebuchadnezzar is the one that gets but the Gemara is going to refine this in a second. So Chadadu kulei krab Nebuchadnezzar ketiv. First of all, that's not a good interpretation, because that whole pasuk is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. It's not talking about Tzidkiyahu. Ve'od Tzidkiyahu tzadika. And moreover, Tzidkiyahu was a tzaddik. He didn't have anything. There was nothing he could do. In other words, he was being sodomized by Nebuchadnezzar. So even though he was causing, in other words, a punishment to come upon Nebuchadnezzar because Nebuchadnezzar was trying to attack him, but it wasn't his fault. Because Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, because as we saw, and we're going to see more later on, that when Nebuchadnezzar wanted to attack Tzidkiyahu, this punishment came upon him, but it wasn't Tzidkiyahu's fault. So how can you say that Tzidkiyahu was punished for bringing punishment upon Nebuchadnezzar? Rather, it's from here. Because it says in where is that? Is that in Mishlei? Yeah, it's in Mishlei. So it says that punishment is not good for a tzaddik. In other words, it's not good for a tzaddik to punish others. In lo tov el ra. And not good means it's bad. Uktiv, and it says in the pasuk, Kilo el chafetz resha'ata, lo yichurecha ra. It says you are not a God that desires wickedness, and evil will not live with you. Tzaddik ata Hashem v'lo yagor bemegurecha ra. It says you are righteous, Hashem, and evil will not live with you. So since it says anosh la tzaddik lo tov, that punishment, that for a tzaddik to cause punishment to happen to someone else is bad, and bad things don't exist in the inner chamber of Hashem, that means that even if you're a tzaddik, if you cause punishment to come upon someone else, you're not accepted into the inner circle of Hashem. So my mashma. So how do we know dehai chalashim lishana depurahu? How do you know that when it says that the kohanim can make chalashim, it means they can make lotteries? Okay, dichtiv, because it says ech nafalta mishamayim. How did you fall from heaven? Helel ben Shachar, star of the morning. Where was I? Okay. Nigdata la'aretz cholesh al goyim. Okay, you've been cut down to the ground. Cholesh al goyim, the one who makes lottery over the nations. Okay, in other words, you play the nations like a game. This is talking about Nebuchadnezzar, that he was so arrogant that he manipulated the nations like they were just a game for him. Amar Rabba bar Ravuna, Rabba bar Ravuna says, what he would do was that each day he would make a lottery to decide which one of the kings to sodomize for that day. That's what it means. You would put a lottery over the nations. And it says, all of the nations in total, and the rest of the pasuk says that all of these nations are going to that all of these nations are rested finally after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, that they're very happy that Nebuchadnezzar is gone. And what is the reason why they're happy? Because every day he was victimizing them, so he was subjecting them to this terrible disgrace, and therefore they were very happy, and they could finally rest when he was deposed and when he was killed. Rabbi Yochanan says that means that they no longer had to be sodomized and raped by Nebuchadnezzar. Rabbi Yochanan said, all the years of that tzaddik, lo nimtza. All the days of that rasha, lo nimtza sechok befe kol birya. Nobody could laugh. In other words, as long as Nebuchadnezzar was alive, nobody could ever laugh. Why? Because they were so afraid of him. Shene'emar, as it says, Nacha shaketa kol haaretz. Where is that? What's the exact language of the? Yeah, it's patzchu. Nacha shaketa kol haaretz patzecharina. It says that now the land has been calm and gladness is breaking forth. Why is it breaking forth now? Only because now Nebuchadnezzar is dead. Right, so patzchurina, because now Nebuchadnezzar is dead. But before miklal da'ad hashtalo havarina, before that there was no gladness because nobody could be happy because Nebuchadnezzar was victimizing everybody. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yitzchak said that Rabbi Yochanan said, "Asur la'amod beveito shelo torasha." It's prohibited to stand in the house of Nebuchadnezzar. Shenemar, as it says, "U'seirim yirkidusham." It says that demons will dance in the place of Nebuchadnezzar, meaning no person should go there or be there. Only bad forces could be there. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda said that Rav says v'shashibikesh oto rasha lasot lotot tzadikach. At the time when that rasha Nebuchadnezzar wanted to victimize and sodomize Tzidkiyahu, nimshecha orlato shlosh meot amma. His foreskin grew 300 amot. And he was going, and it was going around. It was so long that it went around all of the kings that were there in the room, and it was a great embarrassment for him. Shnemar savata kalon mikavod, that you have been sated more with disgrace than honor. Shetega matav vehe'arel, drink also you vehe'arel, and become foreskinned, so to speak. So that was what happened to him to prevent him from sodomizing Tzidkiyahu, and it brought embarrassment upon him. So before we thought that was a was a criticism of Tzidkiyahu, that he was responsible for this bad thing happening to Nebuchadnezzar, but certainly not. He was just a victim in the whole thing. And and what does it say? Arel begematria shilosh miotave. And Arel is the gematria of 300, because Resh is 200, Ayin is 70, and Lamed is 30. So that means 300. So the word Arel means you will become 300. You're 300 amot long foreskin. And Rav Yehuda said that Rav said that even when that wicked person Nebuchadnezzar went to hell, they were still scared of him.
Yeah.
Okay, so why? Even all the kings that were already in Gehinom, they were afraid. Everyone was shaking. They said, maybe he's coming to be the leader down here. He was such an imposing, powerful person that maybe he's coming to lead down here. So they wanted to know, is he going to rule over us, or is he going to be, it should probably say kamonu, or is he going to be weak like, or it should say, or is he going to be weak like the rest of us? Okay, huba. So is he coming to be a leader or to be nothing like the rest of us? Shenemar, as it says, gamata, also you. Chuleta, I think it should be right.
Chuleta.
Yeah, that you have become weak. Chuleta, right? Chuleta, come on. Eleno nimshalta. So they interpret it as a question. Are you weak like us, or eleno nimshalta, or have you come to rule over us, right? So Yatzata bat kol v'amra, a divine voice came out and said, Mimi na'amta, who are you greater than? Rida, go down, vehoshkeva et arelim, and lie with the uncircumcised. In other words, obviously Nebuchadnezzar, even after death, is nothing. He might have been powerful in this world, but in the next world he's nothing, and he will be just the same as everyone else who goes to Gehinnom. And then it says, Ech Shavat Noges, Shavetam Madeva. How has the oppressor stopped, and the gold one has stopped? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said, the Rav said, Shavata Umazo, She'amra Madod Uvahave. That this nation that used to say, measure and bring. Rashi says, Ma'od v'dinarei zahav v'haveh, because that's why it says, Shavata madheva. In other words, the nation that was oppressing and saying, bring gold, in other words, that was taxing, levying taxes on all the other nations, has now disappeared. This is talking about the fall of Babylonia. Not that they said madod v'haveh, to measure and bring us gold, but they said me'od me'od, don't even measure, bring everything you've got. In other words, this nation plundered all the other nations below midah, without measuring it. And then it says what does it say? Virabu yiterahu saftali. So, and he says there was, and something urvu yatira Husfatli, it should be. Because this is from Daniel. Urvuya tira husfatli, and this additional greatness was added to me. What does this mean? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. This is what Rav Yehuda said, that Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba said, Melamed sherachav al ari, that Nebuchadnezzar rode on an ari zachar, on a male lion, v'kashar tanin berosho, and he tied a serpent to his head. Lekayem hashnemar, as it said, to fulfill the pasuk, it says, v'gam et chayat hasadeh natati lo le'ovdo, that in the prophecy that was given to Yirmiyahu that Nebuchadnezzar would rule, it says that he will rule also over the wild beasts of the field. I've given them over to him to rule. And so in order to demonstrate that, he would ride on a lion and he would tie a serpent to his head to show that he was the master even of the beasts of the field. And that's why it says that there was an extra greatness that was given to me, that I could show that I wasn't only the master of all human beings and other kingdoms, but I was also the master of the animal kingdom. Shabbat Shalom.